The acrid smoke still hung thick in the air 3 days after the bombardment. Corporal Jackson Vale navigated through the rubble of what had once been Sector 7, his medical kit bouncing against his hip. The Terran-Vorthak War had been raging for 2 years now, and scenes like this had become grimly familiar, entire city blocks reduced to twisted metal and ash. A weak cry pierced the morning silence. Jackson froze, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Vorthak scouts were known to use distress calls as ambush tactics, but something about this sound was different, younger, more desperate. He approached cautiously, climbing over a collapsed wall, following the intermittent whimpers. Behind a partially intact, reinforced barrier, he found her. She couldn't have been more than 16 by Vorthak standards, small for her species, with deep violet skin mottled by bruises and cuts. Her right leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and her breathing was shallow, labored. But what struck him most were her eyes, large, luminous pools of shifting color that fixed on him with a mixture of terror and resignation. Protocol demanded he call it in. Enemy combatant, potentially gathering intelligence, possibly booby-trapped. The words of his commanding officer echoed in his mind. The only good Vorthak is a dead Vorthak. Instead, Jackson holstered his weapon and knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." She flinched at his words but didn't flee. Her leg was clearly broken, making escape impossible. Jackson noticed dried blood on her temple, probably a concussion from the blast impact. She was no soldier, just a civilian caught in the crossfire. "I'm going to help you, okay?" He pointed to his medical kit, then gestured to her injuries. The universal language of aid seemed to transcend species barriers. Over the next hour, using a combination of gestures and simple words, Jackson managed to splint her leg and clean her wounds. She watched him with those color-shifting eyes, occasionally making soft clicks and whistles that he assumed were thanks in her language. The biggest challenge was moving her to safety. His patrol route wouldn't be checked for another 6 hours, giving him a small window. He found an old maintenance shed, partially collapsed but structurally sound enough to hide them both. "This is insane," he muttered to himself as he helped her inside. If discovered, he'd face court-martial at minimum, execution at worst. But looking at her, this child who'd probably lost her family to human bombs, he couldn't walk away. For 5 days, Jackson played a dangerous game. During his shifts, he worked normally, performing his duties without raising suspicion. But every spare moment found him returning to the shed with stolen medical supplies, food rations, and water. Communication remained limited to gestures and expressions, but understanding grew. She showed him a small pendant she wore, intricate silver work depicting 2 moons eclipsing each other. He offered her his mother's scent, Christopher Metal, in return. They shared rations, him carefully avoiding anything that might be toxic to her physiology based on his basic xenobiology training. On the 6th day, her leg had healed enough for her to walk with support. Jackson knew he had to help her escape before the next sector sweep. Under cover of a moonless night, during his solo patrol window, he guided her to the edge of the human perimeter. "There's a refugee convoy heading for the neutral zone tomorrow," he whispered, pointing east. "They'll take you in, get you to safety." She nodded, understanding the urgency even without knowing the words. Then, unexpectedly, she reached up and placed her palm against his face, a gesture he'd later learn was the highest form of gratitude in Vorthak culture. Her skin was surprisingly warm, and for a moment, their eyes met in the darkness. She clicked softly, it sounded like a name. "Kithara," she repeated, tapping her chest. "Jackson," he replied, mirroring her gesture. Then she was gone, disappearing into the night like a ghost. Jackson stood watching the darkness long after her footsteps faded, knowing he'd never see her again, but feeling something had fundamentally changed within him. 18 months later, the war ended with a precarious ceasefire. Jackson left the military, haunted not by the enemies he'd killed, but by the one he'd saved. He became a trauma counselor, helping other veterans process their experiences. But sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd touch his face where her palm had rested and wonder what became of the alien girl with eyes like swirling galaxies. 9 years passed. The world moved on, rebuilding from the ashes of war. And Jackson Vale prepared for a Tuesday morning that would change everything he thought he knew about mercy, gratitude, and the bonds that transcend species. Jackson was in his office at the Veterans Mental Health Center, reviewing notes for tomorrow's group therapy session, when the emergency broadcast pierced the late afternoon quiet. He reached for the remote just as the screen lit up with breaking news. Massive energy signatures detected across major population centers. We're receiving reports of unidentified vessels materializing in Earth's atmosphere. His blood chilled. Not again. The war had ended 9 years ago. The ceasefire held, tensions remained, but actual vessels. Jackson rushed to the window. The city skyline was normal, but social media feeds on his phone exploded with videos from other continents, massive ships hovering over capitals worldwide. Within hours, every news channel carried the same image: a sleek, impossibly large warship settling above the United Nations headquarters in New York. Jackson recognized the distinctive fractal patterns along its hull, Vorthak imperial design, but unlike anything from the war. This was a peacetime vessel, adorned with what appeared to be ceremonial markings. Diplomatic envoy, the anchors speculated, though their nervous voices betrayed uncertainty. Jackson couldn't sleep that night. Something stirred in his gut, not anxiety but recognition. He'd studied Vorthak culture extensively after the war, driven by memories of violet eyes and gentle touches. These weren't invasion formations. The ship placement, the timing, it felt like a summons. The next morning confirmed his suspicions. A single figure in flowing, hooded robes emerged from the warship, flanked by an honor guard whose armor gleamed with precious metals. The figure moved with fluid grace toward the assembled world leaders, ignoring the stammered greetings and nervous military personnel. Jackson watched from his apartment screen, coffee growing cold in his hand. The figure stopped before the UN Secretary-General and raised a hand for silence. "I am seeking one among you," the figure spoke, voice carrying across the plaza with technological amplification. "9 of your years passed. During the time of conflict, a human soldier showed mercy to a lost child. I am that child returned." The hood fell back, revealing features that made Jackson's heart stop. Kythera but transformed. Gone was the frightened girl with mottled bruises. In her place stood an imposing woman, easily 7 feet tall, her violet skin now bearing intricate silver tattoos marking royal status. Her hair, previously matted and bloodied, now flowed like liquid starlight. Those color-shifting eyes swept across the crowd with authority that commanded immediate respect. "I am Empress Kythera of the Vorthak Dominion," she continued, her voice carrying both power and something softer, nostalgia. "I seek the human who showed me kindness when my own people would have ordered my execution for being captured. He risked his life, his career, his entire future to heal my wounds and guide me to safety." The world held its breath. Jackson's phone rang. His sister, his colleagues, his neighbors, they all knew his story. He'd never hidden what he'd done, though military brass had been less than pleased with his unauthorized fraternization. His name was Jackson Vale, Kythera stated, and video feeds focused on the UN Secretary-General scrambling to input something into his tablet. "Will he step forward, or must I search your entire world for him?" His hands shook as he turned off the TV. This was impossible. She'd survived, thrived, become an empress, and she remembered not just the act but his name. 3 hours later, official cars pulled up outside his building. Government agents in crisp suits, accompanied by a single figure in Vorthak diplomatic robes. "Corporal Vale, or rather Counselor Vale now?" the agent asked, though they clearly knew who he was. "Empress Kythera has requested your presence." The ride to the UN felt surreal. Through tinted windows, Jackson watched the city blur past. His diplomatic escort, a younger Vorthak female, attempted polite conversation, but he barely heard her words over the thundering of his heartbeat. At the plaza, crowds had gathered behind security barriers. News drones buzzed overhead. The Empress stood precisely where he'd last seen her on television, but now she faced the building entrance, waiting. Jackson stepped from the vehicle. Across 50 yards of polished stone, their eyes met. Time seemed to slow. 9 years melted away, and he was suddenly back in that maintenance shed, watching a broken child with eyes like nebulae accept half his rations. But this woman radiating power and authority was no child. She moved toward him with measured steps, her guard falling back at a gesture. When she stood before him, the height difference was striking. He had to look up to meet her gaze, those same eyes that shifted from violet to silver to deep blue. "Jackson Vale," she said, and her voice carried the same gentle clicks he remembered. now woven through perfect standard language. My people have a tradition. When one shows mercy beyond measure, creates a debt beyond repayment, there is but one response. She extended her hand, palm up, an invitation, not a command. Kneel human, not in submission, but to begin the binding of souls. Let the galaxy witness that some acts transcend species, war, and time itself. The world watched, every news feed, every government official, every citizen tuning in, as Jackson Vale, trauma counselor and former soldier, placed his hand in the Empress's and slowly knelt. As his knee touched the ground, Kithara's color-shifting eyes filled with tears that sparkled like diamonds. "Hello again, kind soldier," she whispered, too softly for any microphone to catch. "I never forgot you." The private ceremonial chamber within the Vorthak vessel was unlike anything Jackson had imagined. Crystalline walls seemed to pulse with soft internal light, responding to presence and emotion. Intricate murals depicting historical binding ceremonies covered every surface, while a circular dais in the center hummed with barely audible energy. Kithara had changed from her formal robes into something more ceremonial, a flowing garment that seemed to be made of liquid mercury, shifting between silver and deep purple with her movements. She moved gracefully around the chamber, adjusting ceremonial implements while explaining what was to come. "The binding of souls is sacred to my people," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the crystalline space. "It requires complete trust, complete honesty. We share not just words, but memories, emotions, the essence of who we are." Jackson stood uncertainly, still wearing his simple earth clothes, jeans and a sweater that felt painfully casual for something so momentous. "And this creates, what exactly, some kind of link between us?" "More than that." Kithara paused in her preparations, turning to face him fully. "It creates a bond that transcends death itself. In our culture, it's reserved for those who save a life at great personal cost, or for," she hesitated, color rising in her cheeks, "for marriage partners." The implication hung in the air between them. Jackson's heart rate increased, though he wasn't sure if it was from nervousness or anticipation. "I need to tell you something first," Kithara continued, approaching him. "After you saved me, I spent months in the neutral zone healing, but your act of mercy, it changed everything I believed about humans. When I returned to my people, I advocated for peace talks. I rose through the ranks not as a warrior, but as a diplomat, the empress who died during the final battle. She named me her successor specifically because of the compassion you showed me." She reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering near his face but not quite touching. "I've spent 9 years wondering if you survived, if you remembered our brief connection as vividly as I did. When I had the power to search for you, I couldn't resist." "Kithara," Jackson said softly, finally using her name aloud. "That night, it was the most meaningful thing I did during the entire war. I've thought about you countless times, wondered who you became." She smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her regal features into something warm and approachable. "Then let us complete what we began." The ceremony itself was unlike anything in human experience. They stood facing each other on the dais, while Kithara initiated the neural link through ancient Vorthak biotechnology. When her fingers touched his temples, the world exploded into shared consciousness. Jackson suddenly experienced Kithara's memories as if they were his own. Her terror during the bombing, the relief when she realized he wouldn't kill her, the gradual understanding that humans weren't all monsters. He felt her gratitude when he shared his rations, her determination to survive because someone had risked everything for her. Then came her later memories, returning to her people changed, arguing passionately in the Vorthak High Council for peace, studying human culture to better understand the kindness she'd witnessed. The loneliness of power, the responsibility of being an empress, and underneath it all, the persistent memory of a human soldier with gentle hands and sad eyes. In return, Kithara experienced his memories, the weight of killing in war, the nightmares that followed, and the night he found her. She felt his internal struggle, the knowledge that helping her violated every order he'd received. She experienced his relief at her survival, and more surprisingly, his years of wondering about her, researching Vorthak culture, hoping she'd found peace. When the sharing ended, they found themselves closer than before, her hands still on his temples, his hands somehow having found her waist. "I felt your loneliness," she whispered. "All these years we've been connected without knowing it." "I never expected to see you again," Jackson replied, voice rough with emotion. "But I'm so glad you came back." The space between them seemed to shrink. The ceremony had created more than understanding. It had revealed feelings that had been growing in both their hearts since that night 9 years ago. "In my culture," Kithara said softly, "when two souls bind this deeply, they are considered married," Jackson finished, having gleaned that understanding from her shared memories. "Betrothed," she corrected with a gentle smile. "The actual union requires—" She paused, a deeper purple flush spreading across her skin, "more private ceremonies." Jackson felt heat rise in his own cheeks but didn't step back. "Is that what you want, or is this just tradition speaking?" Her eyes shifted through their entire spectrum, violet to silver to deep blue to a warm gold he hadn't seen before. "From the moment you touched my face in goodbye, part of my heart belonged to you. I just didn't understand it until I had the power to search the galaxy for one human soldier who showed mercy when the whole world demanded blood." The neural link still hummed faintly between them, allowing him to sense her sincerity, her vulnerability beneath the Empress's authority. "I spent years telling other veterans that we can't let war define us," Jackson said, moving his hands to cup her face the way she'd once touched his. "That kindness matters more than orders. I think I was actually talking about myself, about what happened between us." "And were you right?" she asked, leaning into his touch. "Yes," he replied simply, "and I think I've been waiting 9 years for you to come back." Their kiss was tentative at first, a bridge between species, between past and present. But the binding made deception impossible. When their lips met, they both felt the truth of their connection, the rightness of this moment that transcended duty, war, and the vast gulfs between their worlds. When they finally separated, political and practical concerns seemed very far away. Kithara rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "My advisors are going to have strong opinions about this development," she murmured. Jackson smiled. "Mine too, think they'll survive the shock." "They'll have to," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "After all, I'm the Empress, and you're the human who saved my life and possibly 2 civilizations with one act of kindness." The ceremony was complete, but their journey was just beginning. As they stood in the crystalline chamber, hands intertwined, both knew they faced challenges no binding ceremony could prepare them for. But they also knew they wouldn't face them alone. The royal flagship Starweaver was a marvel of organic architecture. Its corridors seemed to breathe, walls shifting subtly to guide travelers to their destinations. Jackson had been aboard for 2 weeks now, part of an unprecedented diplomatic exchange, though everyone knew his role was more personal than political. "Your quarters are acceptable?" Kithara asked, stepping into his assigned chamber. Her formal crown was absent, her long hair flowing freely over a simple tunic that still managed to look regal. "More than acceptable," Jackson smiled, gesturing to the panoramic window showing Earth shrinking behind them. "Though I'll admit your gravity generators take getting used to. Our destination is only 3 days away, my home system. You'll need to be prepared for Vorthak court protocol." She moved closer, her height difference suddenly less noticeable in the chamber's adaptive lighting. "But first, there's something I want to show you." She led him through corridors that seemed to recognize their passage, walls glowing softly in their wake. Other crew members they encountered performed the gesture he now recognized as acknowledging their Empress, a graceful movement of both hands that seemed to trace constellation patterns. "Do they all know?" he asked quietly. "About the binding? Yes, my people value emotional bonds highly. They're curious about you." She paused, touching a wall panel. "Some are concerned, of course. Traditionalists worry about genetic compatibility, political ramifications, but most understand that without you, there would be no peace to concern themselves with." The door opened to reveal a garden unlike anything on Earth. Bioluminescent plants created a symphony of soft colors, responding to their presence with gentle musical tones. The air itself seemed alive with floating lights like warm fireflies. "It's beautiful," Jackson breathed. "This is the Garden of Promise," Kithara explained, leading him down a path that appeared beneath their feet. "Couples traditionally come here during their bonding period to—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks, "to explore their compatibility." The implication was clear. Jackson felt his pulse quicken as she guided him to a secluded grove where flowering trees created a natural alcove. Soft music from the plants created an intimate atmosphere. "Kithara," he began, but she placed a finger to his lips. I want to understand you without the binding, she said softly. To learn your physical responses, your preferences, as you learn mine. She settled onto what appeared to be a living bench, the surface adjusting to support them both. When she guided him to sit beside her, Jackson noticed how her skin seemed to phosphoresce gently in the garden's ambient light. Their first kiss in the garden was different from the ceremonial one, exploratory, questioning. Jackson marveled at how she tasted faintly of exotic fruits, how her skin was softer than it appeared. Her hands moved to his shoulders, then traced down his arms, clearly learning his human physiology. Your species fascinates me, she murmured against his ear, her breath warm and carrying hints of cinnamon. So different, yet here we are. Jackson's response was cut short by an alarm, sharp, discordant notes that made the garden's soft music cease. Security protocol, Kithara said immediately, standing with fluid grace. We need to return to the command center. The run back was urgent but controlled. In the command center, holographic displays showed multiple contacts approaching from unexpected vectors. Empress, her military advisor, a stern-faced Vorthak with extensive neural modifications, reported crisply. 3 attack vessels displaying the colors of the isolationist faction. They demand you surrender the human for what they're calling trial and execution for war crimes. Preposterous, Kithara stated, but Jackson felt the tension in her voice through their neural link. I have granted him sanctuary. They claim the binding is invalid, that you performed it under emotional distress. They have support from certain council members. Jackson stepped forward. I can surrender myself to protect. No, Kithara's command was sharp, her Empress authority fully engaged. You are under my protection, prepare defensive measures. The attack came faster than expected. The ship shuddered as weapons fire impacted their shields. Jackson was thrown against a console, Kithara moving with inhuman speed to steady him. Get him to the secure chamber, she ordered. Absolutely not, Jackson countered. I have military experience, I can help. Their eyes met, a brief battle of wills that was interrupted by another impact. Sparks flew from overhead systems. Fine, but stay close to me, she decided. The battle was brief, but intense. Isolationist Vorthak boarding parties managed to penetrate the outer hull. Jackson found himself moving beside Kithara through smoke-filled corridors, his old training returning as he assessed threats and covered blind corners. When an assassin emerged from shadows, moving toward Kithara with lethal intent, Jackson reacted on instinct. His tackle sent them both crashing to the deck. The fight was brutal, the assassin enhanced with combat modifications, Jackson relying on desperation and experience. A pulse weapon clattered across the floor. Jackson reached for it, but the assassin's enhanced reflexes were faster. The knife flashed down. Kithara's roar was inhuman. Her hand, suddenly extended with retractable claws he didn't know she possessed, caught the assassin's wrist. With strength that seemed impossible for her elegant frame, she threw the attacker against the wall hard enough to create a dent. Are you hurt? She demanded, kneeling beside Jackson. Her eyes had shifted to a dangerous red he'd never seen before, a predatory color that spoke of protective instincts. I'm fine, he managed, though his shoulder throbbed where he'd hit the deck. Are you okay? You risked your life for me, she said wonderingly, her eyes shifting back to their familiar colors. Even after seeing that you're stronger than you look, that you have claws, Jackson managed a weak smile. I've always suspected there was more to you than diplomatic grace. Her laugh was slightly breathless. And I've seen your military instincts. You moved like you did during the war, protecting others above yourself. As security teams cleared the corridors and damage reports came in, they remained on the floor, facing each other. The adrenaline was fatting, replaced by something else, a deeper recognition of each other's capabilities, vulnerabilities, and the lengths they'd go to for each other's safety. In the garden, Kithara said softly, we were discovering physical compatibility, but this, protecting each other in battle, this proves something deeper. Jackson reached out, touching the spot on her face where a small cut was already healing. That we're partners, in every sense. Yes, she replied, catching his hand and pressing it flat against her skin. Through their binding, he felt her emotions, pride, relief, desire, and beneath it all, a love that surprised them both with its intensity. When we reach my homeworld, she continued, There will be ceremonies, political discussions, probably more protests, but right now. She leaned forward, and their kiss was no longer tentative. It spoke of survival, shared danger, and the unique intimacy of protecting someone you love. When they separated, her eyes held a golden gleam that he was beginning to recognize meant powerful emotion. "Right now, I want to show you the rest of what the Garden of Promise is for," she whispered. Security could handle the cleanup. The council could wait for reports. Sometimes the most important diplomatic decisions were made not in meeting rooms, but in moments of vulnerability and trust shared between two people who had crossed literal galaxies to find each other again. The Union of Two Worlds ceremony took place in the ancient amphitheater on Vorthak Prime, a site older than human civilization. Crystalline spires reached toward twin moons, while beings from 100 different species gathered to witness something unprecedented, the joining of an empress and a human soldier. Jackson stood before millions of beings, wearing ceremonial robes that incorporated both human and Vorthak traditions. Beside him, Kithara radiated elegance in a gown that seemed woven from starlight itself, shifting between the colors of both their peoples. "Do you take this bond freely?" asked the high celebrant, her ancient voice echoing across the amphitheater, "knowing it will change the course of two civilizations." "I do," they responded in unison, their voices carrying across translations to every species present. The ceremony itself was intricate, combining human vows with Vorthak neural bonding, earth rings with Vorthak constellation tattoos that would subtly form on their skin. As they spoke words of commitment, the aurora-like Vorthak Aurora Borealis painted the sky in celebration. But beneath the pageantry, they shared private glances filled with intimate promises yet to be fulfilled. Their wedding night began in Kithara's private chambers, a suite that seemed to float among the stars themselves, with transparent walls offering views of the cosmos. Gone were the formalities, the diplomatic concerns, the watching crowds. "Finally," Kithara breathed, letting her hair fall loose as she faced him. "No advisors, no protocols, just us." Jackson moved toward her, still amazed that this moment was real. "Just us," he agreed, reaching for the fastenings of her ceremonial gown. "Although I should warn you, I've never undressed an empress before." "Good," she said with a smile that was both regal and playful. "I prefer to be your first." Their laughter mingled as fabric whispered to the floor. The differences in their anatomies were fascinating rather than foreign. Exploration became reverence. Curiosity became passion. When skin met skin, their neural link amplified every sensation, creating a feedback loop of shared pleasure that transcended anything either species experienced alone. "Is this," Jackson gasped as her touch awakened responses he didn't know were possible, "is this normal for your people?" "Nothing about us is normal," Kithara murmured, guiding him to their bed that adjusted to support two different physiologies perfectly. "We're creating our own normal." Their union was tender and fierce by turns, two people learning how to love across every barrier that had ever separated their kinds. The neural link meant honesty was impossible to avoid. Every pleasure, every vulnerable moment, every whispered confession of love was immediately shared and returned. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they lay tangled together, her larger frame protectively curved around his, watching the stars wheel overhead through the transparent ceiling. 5 years later, Jackson stood in the gardens of the New Earth Embassy on Vorthak Prime, watching his children play. They were unique, the first human-Vorthak hybrids, a blend of features that somehow worked perfectly. Their skin held the faintest hint of violet, eyes that shifted color with emotion, and hair that caught light like starshine. "They have your stubborn streak," Kithara observed, appearing beside him with silent grace. Even after 5 years of marriage, her presence still made his heart race. "And your diplomatic skills," he replied, as their eldest daughter mediated a dispute between her younger siblings. "Watch, she's already negotiating a treaty over the playground equipment." They stood together in comfortable silence, his arm around her waist. The early political challenges had been fierce, protests from both species, arguments in councils, heated debates about genetic compatibility. But their children had proven the ultimate diplomats, their very existence a bridge between worlds. "Remember our first night here?" Kithara asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "You were so nervous about the gravity difference." "I was nervous about a lot of things," Jackson admitted. I had no idea I was falling in love with an alien princess who'd grow up to be an empress. And I had no idea a random act of human kindness would reshape my entire world. She turned to face him, her eyes cycling through their familiar spectrum of colors. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd followed orders that day? Jackson pulled her closer, marveling as always at how perfectly they fit despite their differences. Every day, and every day I'm grateful I didn't. Through their permanent neural link, she felt the sincerity of his words just as he felt her contentment. Their bond had deepened beyond the ceremonial binding. They were partners in parenting, governance, and the everyday miracle of two beings who shouldn't have worked but did. Ambassador Vale, a aide called from the diplomatic entrance. The Earth delegation has arrived for the afternoon's trade negotiations. Empress, another aide added. The Council of Worlds awaits your decision on the Interspecies Education Initiative. They shared a look of amused resignation. The work of building bridges between civilizations was never done. But they'd learned to find pockets of peace in busy days, moments of connection that sustained them through diplomatic challenges. Tonight, Kithara promised, her hand finding his. After the children are asleep and the last official is gone, the garden has new flowers blooming. The ones from both our worlds? Jackson asked, remembering her surprise when she'd managed to hybridize Earth roses with Vorthak luminescence flowers. The very ones, they're most beautiful at night when their bioluminescence mingles with starlight. He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture that still made her eyes shift to that particular shade of gold that meant powerful emotion. It's a date, Your Magnificence. Ambassador, she returned with formal dignity that cracked into laughter. Even after years of public life, they reveled in these private moments of play. As they separated to handle their duties, their youngest child, barely 3 years old, tugged on Jackson's ceremonial robes. Looking down, he saw violet eyes regarding him with a child's directness. Papa, she said in the blended accent all their children carried, Mama's smile is different when you're here. How so, sweetheart? The child considered, then demonstrated by making her own face radiate joy. Like stars are born inside her. Jackson caught Kithara's eye across the garden. Even with diplomatic delegations waiting, she paused to share this moment with him. Their neural link carried no words, just pure emotion, the gratitude two people feel when they realize that against all odds, they've created something beautiful together. Yes, he told his daughter, watching his wife disappear into her official duties. She's like that for me too. That night, as promised, they met in the bioluminescent garden. The hybrid flowers glowed softly, casting everything in a romantic light. They walked familiar paths hand in hand, sometimes talking about their day, sometimes silent and simply enjoying each other's presence. Do you remember, Kithara said as they paused by their favorite grove, when this was all new, when we were learning how to touch each other? Now we touch each other's souls, Jackson replied, pulling her close. But I still love discovering new ways to make you smile. Their kiss was soft, unhurried, the kiss of two people secure in their love but still delighted by it. Around them, the flowers seemed to pulse brighter, as if nature itself celebrated their continued devotion. As they headed back toward their chambers, Jackson glanced up at the impossible alien stars that had become home. Somewhere out there, Earth turned with its own night sky. 2 worlds, 2 species, countless differences, but none of it mattered as much as the quiet contentment of walking beside someone who understood your soul. Empress, he said formally, opening the door to their private wing. Ambassador, she replied with equal formality, then shattered the pretense with a grin. Race you to the bedroom. Last one there deals with the morning diplomatic briefings. Their laughter echoed through halls that had witnessed the shaping of history, the joining of worlds, and the simple joy of two people who had found each other against impossible odds. Some stories ended with happily ever after. Theirs continued with gratefully ever forward, each day building upon a foundation of mercy, courage, and love that transcended every boundary the universe had tried to place between them. As Jackson settled into bed beside his wife, her form adjusting to accommodate his human frame, he touched the spot on his face where her palm had first rested years ago. Through their bond, he felt her matching memory, and they shared a moment of profound gratitude for a war that ended, for mercy shown in darkness, and for the beautiful impossibility of love that had grown from a single act of kindness. Thank you, Kithara whispered, her words nearly lost in the space between dream and waking, for seeing me as more than an enemy all those years ago. Thank you, Jackson replied, pulling her closer, for coming back to find me. And in the space where their souls touched through neural link, where human met Vorthak, where ambassador met empress, the simple truth remained. Some bonds are written in the stars themselves, waiting for two people brave enough to reach across any divide to make them real.